Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another interview. Today, I'm here with Mr. Minear.
Glad to be here, Andrew. Thank you.
He is a senior Bible teacher at Mount Perrin Christian School, and today we're going to be talking about defending Christianity. So, I'm just going to ask you a first question here right off the bat. I know your class is mainly like apologetics. Kind of explain like what you focus on.
Yes, like you said, the title of the class is Apologetic Thinking, which is Christian apologetics. And apologetics, the most simple definition, is defending the faith. And so, what I try to guide students to do in my classroom is ask difficult questions of the faith, questions that they might ask themselves or are asking currently, or questions that other people might ask them. Questions that challenge, object to, maybe criticize the Christian faith, because I think we need to process those questions so that we can arrive at answers and responses, or at least be able to facilitate an intentional and meaningful conversation where we take people's questions seriously.
So, my next question, what is your first step when someone comes to you, like questioning Christianity?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I really do think the first step sets the tone for that process. And so for me, I attended an apologetic conference when I was pursuing my MDiv. It's a pastoral degree from seminary. And there was a thought that has stuck with me ever since, and it was seek to understand before being understood. So if someone were to ask me something about the faith, to defend the faith, really my first step would be to not ignore the question, but kind of put it to the side and just get to know them first. Because I think every person is different. And so while you might be asking a question that other people are asking, you might be asking it for different reasons. And it's those reasons I want to discover, because then I might kind of adjust my approach a little bit. I might talk about different things or use different examples or use different arguments to answer your question than I would with somebody else. For example, if someone asks me a question like, why do you believe God exists, right? I'd first want to get to know their interests, right? If they're a very science oriented person, then I'm going to use an argument for God's existence that uses a lot of scientific empirical evidence. If that person is very kind of justice oriented, right? They see a lot of wrongs and they want to make those things right. Like they want to advocate for people in need. Then I might use something like the moral argument for God's existence, which affirms that, yeah, what you're seeking is good. Like the fact that you want to help people is really good, but why do you think that? Right? And maybe it's because a God exists, and by a God, I mean the God of the Bible. And so I think I that's how I'd identify my first step, is that we need to get to know people first before we really start to defend the faith.
All right, so next question. Are there any specific verses that you normally turn to in that kind of situation?
Yeah, again, good question. Again, it depends on who the person is. Paul in Acts 17, if you read, you could read the entire chapter, but I think it's like verse 1 to 33. Or no, I think it's Acts 17. Read the whole chapter. Forgetting the verses, but he takes time to get to know his Greek audience. He's in the city of Athens, and in his practice of apologetics, defending the faith, trying to persuade people, he actually doesn't quote the Old Testament, which would be the scripture at his time, right? The New Testament was being written during that time. And the reason he didn't quote the Old Testament was because his Greek audience wouldn't consider that an authority, right? It would just be quoting another book. Like, okay, what does that mean for me, right? I don't see that as a source of truth. And so, depending on who the person is, I might not immediately go to scripture, but I would still be using scripture though. And one way that I would definitely use it, there's a great book I read recently, It's called The Air We Breathe. And it's talking about how our culture often supports biblical values without realizing it, right? Our culture is very big on equality. Well, why is that? It's actually because our culture has adopted that biblical value that Jesus in the early church and the church throughout its history has made a big impact on Western culture, right? Being the United States, Europe, kind of the West as we say it. And so what I'd really try and help people understand is that a lot of their values, like their good values, are not actually in opposition to Scripture. They actually have them because of Scripture, whether they realize that or not. And we often take that for granted because, like, well, why wouldn't you be for equality, right? But many societies throughout history have not considered equality to be a given, right? And the reason that our society often does is because of the influence of the Bible on our culture. So I'd kind of use broad biblical themes like that. But one thing to kind of illustrate that more specifically, I think I'd use Matthew 5, verse 3 through 12, which is the Beatitudes, where Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Because I think as he walks through those Beatitudes, he really, I think, touches on a lot of things that we value, right? We shouldn't use our power to oppress people, right? We should be meek. We should be humble and gentle. Like, a lot of those things we value. And it just shows that, well, those things can be traced back to Christ. If it weren't for him and the impact of the early church, our values might look a lot different than they do today.
Yep, that's great. One more question. What do you do when someone doesn't accept your response or is like too stubborn to accept it?
Again, good question. Definitely the first step is prayer, right? It's recognizing there's another kind of saying in apologetics that we can't argue people into the kingdom, right? We can't argue people into salvation. That's the work of the Spirit. That's the work of God in that person's life. So definitely prayer, praying for that person. Like, God, would you break through those walls? Would you heal the wounds that might be, stopping them from believing in you. So I definitely think prayer. Perseverance, though, too. We need to give people space to disagree, right? To not believe, because we want the freedom to believe what we want to, right? What we've chosen to. So we need to give other people that freedom too. And so I think I always encourage people, apologetics usually isn't going to be a one-off conversation. It might be, right? I think God can definitely appoint those kind of times where it's just a chance encounter and he moves in a powerful way and that person receives the gospel and commits their life to Christ. But I think more often than not, it's going to be a process. So it's showing the goodness of God, not just in what we say, but what we do, right? So we might present our beliefs, present some good arguments to support those beliefs, but then what we need to do, if they're not accepting it or they're stubborn in that, we just need to show the love of God through our actions, right? Show them that we really do believe what we say we believe because our life has been impacted, right, for the better, in a positive way. So that's what I'd encourage people. If they're discouraged because that person they've been talking to just really continues to have a hardened heart, they're just not wanting to accept the gospel, pray, trust it to God, but then have your apologetics, your defense of the faith, really more be your lifestyle and your actions of love towards that person.
So we'll make this last question here. Say there's someone, probably start asking this like after every interview. Say there's someone watching this video that they watched it because they want to hear some like main ideas of what it kind of this Christianity thing's all about, and they maybe want to move forward. What's their first step in trying to pursue the faith?
Again, good question. Yeah, for those of you that might be watching, you're questioning, you're asking, what should I believe and why should I believe it? So the past 10 years especially, God has been teaching me more and more that if we really want to experience, we often call it the good life, right? Um, we will never find that. We will never find the purpose, the meaning, the fulfillment that we're looking for apart from God. So, for those of you that might be watching and you're wondering if kind of Christian faith is worth it, um, I would strongly say yes, because I think those deep things that we're looking for, to be known by somebody, right? To have a relationship with somebody with someone who will accept us, who will love us, who will work in our lives to um, make us better, right? That's only with God. He's the only one that can supply, that can provide that relationship to where um, he knows me fully, and yet he still accepts and loves me. But he loves me to the extent to where he's going to work in my life so I mature, so I grow, and I become more like him, which is good because he's a God who is love. And why wouldn't we want to be that? And so, if that sounds appealing to anybody, I would say first find someone in your life that's a Christian, right? That they can walk with you through this process. If you don't have a Bible, get one, right? And start reading. Definitely start. I strongly suggest starting in Matthew, right? The first gospel or biography of the life of Jesus and what he did. And yeah, I think that's what I'd say. Find someone that can kind of be your mentor in a sense, just kind of your partner in walking through these initial stages. Get a Bible and really know that I really do think it's the biblical worldview is the thing that makes sense of life. That if you look out at life, we see a lot of problems, right? The Bible calls those problems sin. And the best solution to sin is the gospel. It's the good news of Christ and him seeking to establish his kingdom, right, on earth as in heaven. So yeah, I think that's how I'd answer that question.
So, like you said, you need to find a person to try to help you through that. And if you're watching this and you kind of have that, you can tell me that in the comments, and I'll try to help you. And I'll ask Mr. Minear, and he'll try to help you. So, if you have questions, you just put it in the comment section, and we'll try to answer it. So, thank you. So, stay tuned for more interviews.